Because we do have a tight schedule, and believe it or not, David at the end of the evening is taking some of our guests to San Francisco because they have to catch a red eye in San Francisco. So the Vanguard never stops working. I'm Cecilia Escamilla Greenwald. I'm David's wife, and this is our other half, Jasmine Adela Cardona Munoz Escamilla Greenwald Stein, and she is modeling the Vanguard shirt. I know
There's Jersey right there.
Woo, Jazz! Not only is this girl amazing as a model, but she helped me get our catering together today because we had some last minute adjustments. So she's been wonderfully helpful. I'm very happy you're helping Mommy, Jasmine. What I want to make sure that everybody knows before we get started, we have a very exciting opportunity. If you become a Davis Vanguard sponsor, you receive a wonderful Davis Vanguard shirt like the one Jasmine's wearing, and that's just for $10 a month. And not only that, you will also be entered to win one of 6 books that we have left. For those of you that were not able to attend, Rachel Barco. She's the author. Thank you. Big hand clap for her. Prisoners of Politics. She was over at UC Davis talking about her book. It's a fantastic book. We're starting a book club to discuss this issue, and you'll be entered to win one of these books, but you will definitely get a Davis Vanguard shirt, and all for being a $10 a month subscriber. And as many of you know, the Vanguard is a 501c3 nonprofit. Oops, I'm talking too loud, sorry. Okay, I'm not talking too loud, dear. I can talk this loud. You can be entered to win a Davis Vanguard shirt, a book, and a Vanguard shirt. And the Davis Vanguard is a 501c3 nonprofit, so it really depends on the support of people that read the Vanguard, follow the Vanguard, and all the important work that the Vanguard does. Please give yourselves a round of applause, because without all of you and the others that couldn't be here today, there is no way that the Vanguard would be as successful as it is. And we've been expanding not only from Yolo County, but to Sacramento and now to San Francisco. So there is a need for it. So I'm going to hand the mic over to David. But I just wanted to welcome you all tonight. Thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedules to be here tonight and hear this wonderful lineup of speakers that we have. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Dan. Sorry. Scoot over. Sorry. So not only you can, there's a is it called a URL code? What is that? What is that thing called?
QR code.
QR code. There's a QR code on here. You can just click on that with your phone, and that leads you to where you can sign up to be a subscriber for $10 a month. Also, you can go to the front table, and they can help you with that, okay? In case you want to know how to sign up. And so please, you can do that throughout the evening. Thank you very much.
That's my speech.
You lost it.
Like the suit.
Hello, everybody. Everybody, make sure you grab food. Food's arriving. We got falafels and stuff on the way as well. So make sure you eat up because we got tons of it. This is a very jam-packed meeting today. So we're going to have a very tight schedule. We're going to start out with some of our partners in the criminal justice movement, and then I will give my speech where I give a lot more detail than I am right now. So the first person I'm going to invite up is Elizabeth Kim, the president of the Sacramento chapter of the National Lawyers Guild.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Kim. I'm the president of National Lawyers Guild. I'm very thrilled to be here. And also on behalf of our entire board and our chapter, we're very proud to sponsor Davis Vanguard. We are the first racially integrated bar association in the United States. We were formulated in 1937. I won't give you the whole history, but we've been on the correct side of history since 1937, fighting for civil rights and advocating for human rights over property interests. And the work that we do is primarily focused on police brutality, legal observing at protests, and protecting your First Amendment right to free speech. However, we also engage in many other committee work, such as sponsoring bills and working with other partners in the community, working and supporting all of our activist organizations, and of course, encouraging honest journalism like Davis Vanguard to tell the truth and hold people accountable and fix our systems in a very restorative way. Yes. So thank you to Davis Vanguard for all the wonderful work that you've been doing. And we're also very excited to be here, particularly for the prosecutorial reform theme. And I want to applaud all the speakers here tonight for all of your progressive work, because it is so imperative that we try so hard to fix this justice system that is crippling and hurting so many people from their ability to survive. So I want to point out that the DAs are the most powerful, influential actors in our criminal justice system. Right. They have almost unlimited power in their ability to convict and sentence people that are charged with crimes. And they are a major driver of mass incarceration that compounds not just racial disparities, but economic disparities as well. And so 70% of the district attorney seats run uncontested. And 1 in 3 of Americans have a criminal record, which impacts their ability to have access to housing, jobs, education, and job skills. So I'm very excited on behalf of our board. We are very excited to hear from our speakers tonight, and we're very proud to sponsor Davis Vanguard for this event.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the National Lawyers Guild and all your great work that you do in our community. Now, I want to do a quick pitch again for our subscription drive. And the reason this is important is that, believe it or not, every month we have to spend $10,000 to make our payroll. And so that means a lot of work on our part raising the money. But every person who donates $10 a month on a recurring basis, that's $10 I don't have to worry about at the start of the month to raise so that we can make payroll by the end of the month. So if you can go to the back during our program and fill out the sheet, you can get a free t-shirt and enter to win the book. But the most important thing is you're helping to finance our work in Yolo County, Sacramento County, and also San Francisco County. So the next person I'm going to introduce, who's speaking on behalf of the ACLU, really needs no introduction in these parts. Last year, he was the progressive DA candidate who took a campaign that nobody believed would go anywhere and came within an eyelash of knocking off a 3-term incumbent district attorney. So now that I've embarrassed him, Dean Johansson.
So I'll start off by saying exactly how I started off my campaign. Educate, don't incarcerate. We need transparency and accountability. And I only have a few minutes here. If you notice, I'm pasted into the people you see sitting here in the front are truly my brothers and sisters here. And we formed a group. I don't know if you realize, for months and months, we met together in Smart Justice, California. I wish that Anna Irwin was here and Irene. We had formed a bond in the face of just horrible conditions. If you could, I think we understand just how horrible these campaigns can be. I heard 70% of the races go uncontested. I actually thought the numbers were much higher, more like 85% of the prosecutorial races across the country go uncontested. There's a reason for that, because, And there's a reason why the last two in this county that contested the DA here, one lives, 250 miles away, the other one lives in another state now. Because this isn't, as Genevieve and Noah here especially can tell you, this is soul-crushing work that we get when we throw ourselves out there. Realize, and I want to thank these folks for coming here to Yolo County. We went from nothing, no money, no recognition. You had a guy like me who's just a rank and file public defender in 133 days that went to, what were we? We were 48% of the vote, so all we needed were 2% more. And that was because of you. That wasn't, as I started out saying too, it's not about me, it's about we. And I'm sure that all these folks here in the front will echo the same sentiment. And I'll sit down now. I'm here as a board member of Yolo County ACLU. It was Natalie Romoli, who I'm sure she wishes she could be here today. As you know, she's bedridden. And the bottom line is that I wanted to thank every single one of you for your interest and your help too. Without you, there wouldn't be the other side of this equation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. So, one of the themes for tonight is going to be wrongful convictions, because the consequence of having bad DAs is that sometimes they lock up the wrong people. And we're going to hear from some of those folks that have been on the receiving end. One of the groups that I have been working with as I've expanded what the Vanguard has done in the last year has been working with people and families and friends of wrongfully convicted individuals. And we'll be talking about some in my speech. On Monday, one of the ones that got me into this business, Ajay Dev, will have an evidentiary hearing here in Yolo County. He's been wrongly imprisoned 10 years ago, back in August. Another group that I've been working with and gotten to know is Anand John Alexander. Anand John was a rising star in the fashion industry when, I think it was, 15 years ago? He was wrongly convicted of a series of rapes. And so today, speaking briefly, will be one of his advocates, Raj Vora, who will give a few words on his behalf.
Good evening. I'm Raj Vora. I'm from Beverly Hills, president of the Indian American group in Beverly Hills, as well as international vice president of Indian American community, which have 450 chapters worldwide and 75,000 members. First of all, I wrote down a little bit brief note here, so I don't want to miss any of the points here. To each speaker and supporter here today, thank you for paving the way of equality and justice for all persons. And I'm here for 37 years and living in Beverly Hills for my dream house and good life. I have children, grown up, and successful story. But like each of you, my wife Sonal and I am here. My wife is sitting in the front row. I'm here today instead of going to the beach. I'm here today as a concerned member of the community because wrongful conviction and unfair sentencing, such as Anand John Alexander case, Jeffrey, our friend, is going to speak a little bit about him too. And that that has shaken my conscience and woken up my sense of responsibility as a community leader. And we especially drove down here to attend David Greenwald's platform, which always attracted me in April and today, Cecilia, and both of them. I'm so thankful that you are paving the road for this kind of things and concern. Basically, the community needs leaders like you to make changes to the American justice system, because we do not see the day-to-day, behind-the-scenes working of the legal system. We have been blindly trusting that our system was fair and equal for all persons. We were wrong, but we are no longer going to sit back and accept the status quo. Our eyes have been opened because of you, David and everybody here. Our eyes have opened because of you guys. When I became familiar with Anand John case, I changed from an ordinary citizen to an activist for the change. Anand's case was fought and disturbing red flag for inequality and injustice. And by the way, Anand John, at a young age, highly acclaimed fashion designer. He was in so many news magazines on the cover pages, and renowned not only in America, in Beverly Hills or New York, but all over the world. All Indian communities, and coming from that so strong family, his mom is here, sister is here, his uncle got a highest civilian award recognition from Government of India. So they come from that well-to-do the family at the same time. So I just give you a little brief about Anand. But as far as the case is concerned, the Anand case was brought and disturbing red flags. The prosecutor violated the law, and by injecting racial bias into the trial that resulted in the juror seeking out prejudicial information on South Asian. Although juror misconduct was discovered and declared right after the trial, no new trial was given. Can you imagine being in another country where prosecutors influence a jury because you are a different race and then demonize you as an outsider? That was what happened in Anand John case, and that is what can happen to any one of from a minority group when prosecutor get overzealous and underhanded. The police withheld evidence of Anand's innocence during the trial until it was discovered almost a decade later, and now the state courts refused a new trial, saying that it is late filing. Even though there was not a single scratch on any person in his case, no objective evidence, passing a voluntary lie detector test, and jury was deliberating for 2 weeks, Anand was sentenced to a disproportionate sentence of 59 years to life. And that's very bad. Fortunately, times have changed, and those who were rewarded for being unreasonably tough on crime are now being held accountable, while those who were wrongfully convicted have opportunities to regain their freedom, as we can see from ex-honorees like Jeffrey, Obi, and from platform that put us on the spotlight on ringing the wrong one. And I'm here basically the love from each and every individual. I had a pleasure to meet Jeffrey at my home, and Obi, and so many other ones. And this is the one, the cause definitely touches us, and I'm so thankful I'm here to present a little story, but Jeff is the one who is, I have no words, but I just want to say thank you very much.
Amen.
The Vanguard has been an indispensable part of the administration of justice system in Yolo County. Sad to say, too often, folk get convicted who shouldn't be convicted and sent to prison when they shouldn't be sent to prison.
An individual's civil liberties have been violated in terms of due process, in terms of First Amendment rights, being denied access to an attorney, being wrongfully detained in a local county jail.
There are documented cases of innocent people who have been executed in our country.
We've even seen the phenomenon of people who are sent to death, where later through a confession by the person who was the real killer or by DNA, the folk have been found to be innocent. So we need to have a watch on what's happening in the criminal court system.
I think one of the important things that surprised me a little bit is really the court watch aspect of the Davis Vanguard.
There are 235 cases a year that are getting no coverage at all.
We have law students on our board who are very interested in what the Davis Vanguard is doing.
The Davis Vanguard offers an incredibly important, independent, and informed voice and vehicle for our community to understand deeply the issues that we're facing.
One of the things that we've struggled with in our community is sort of the insiders kind of knowing what's going on, and regular people who don't have time to come down to city council chambers every other Tuesday not knowing exactly what's going on. And the Vanguard really, I think, shines a light on some of the things going on at City Hall.
So David Greenwald and his team of reporters, they go out there, they do real investigative reporting.
But if we want hard-hitting and penetrating investigative coverage, we need to hire somebody who has the training and experience to be able to do that.
If we could generate some funding.
So I'm going to start back by how I got involved in the first place, which was at a time of a lot of turmoil here in Davis because we had just had a pepper spray incident. And that was the first time I was aware there was a Vanguard, and there were a lot of comments going back and forth, and I started commenting. So the most important thing to me about the Vanguard is that it is a conversational space, so that people who either live here in town or have interests here in town can express their views and interact directly with each other, as opposed to the much slower mechanism that you get when people put in letters to the editor or those kind of comments.
They talk to many people from diverse communities, and in fact that's one of the things that I admire most about the Vanguard, how respectful they are to understand that there are many different points of view that need to be considered and understood, and they respect the diversity of our community.
And our system has failed our society as well. It definitely boils down to privilege, but I think it's different facets of privilege. It's not just privilege by race, but it's also privilege by money. You know, what's your economical background? What's your lifestyle? What's your upbringing? The sad thing about this is that
family I've been working with for 7 years now, the father was in prison for 378 years. And most people, including me, believe he's innocent.
Wow.
And so the case finally is going to the appellate court next week.
We have tracked numerous cases in which an individual who's technically classified as an undocumented immigrant has been detained for over 50 days without access to a phone call, without access to an attorney. It has compromised the man's ability to support his family. He was separated from his children. So I think Davis Vanguard is doing some very progressive work.
Indeed, my hope is that the Vanguard will be able to expand beyond Yolo County to the nearby counties and hopefully statewide.
So I wanted to start with that. It's kind of a sad note, but that video was produced back in the fall of 2016 by a longtime friend of my wife and myself, a guy named Ernest Harris. And unfortunately, a few weeks ago, he passed away unexpectedly at a very young age. So appreciate his work. I kept wondering if I was going to make it through that video without breaking down, but I think I've done okay. So in 2011, we had just started the court watch in Yolo County the year before, and one of our supporters sent me a flyer about the Justice Summit in San Francisco. It looked interesting, so my wife Cecilia, myself, a couple of interns, and some other friends, we went down to San Francisco for the day. And we watched the all-day Justice Summit put on by San Francisco Public Defender Jeff Adachi. This was really the first time I had gotten to see the cutting edge of the justice reform movement. And we were blown away by what we saw. Cecilia turned to me and she said, "Hey, we can do this in Yolo County." And so we came back here, and this is our 9th fundraiser, our 9th annual event, and these are modeled after what Jeff had done in his Justice Summits. And we got a chance to return the favor. In 2013, we invited Jeff Adachi to come speak and receive our Justice Award for the top attorney. He came and he spoke, and he was blown away by what we were doing here in Yolo County. I would find out years later that Jeff was so blown away that he came back to San Francisco and he wanted to do his own court watch there. I've always been so humbled to read on his media bio, including the bio after he died, where our award that we had given him as Attorney of the Year was listed as one of his great accomplishments. In 2016, Jeff was our keynote speaker along with Phil Telfion on bail reform. That event was held November the 19th, 11 days after Donald Trump was elected the president. Everyone came here and they were kind of shell-shocked. And Jeff really captured the moment. He said, "The reality is that much as things change, and we are that change, we make that change happen without the federal government. The idea that we can count on our elected officials to make change, especially around criminal justice reform, is really a myth. It should always come from the grassroots, and it's always come from people like you." Jeff's death hit me really hard. I don't have a lot of public officials that I truly admire. No offense to anyone in this room. But Jeff was someone whose vision and passion he shared with me, and I admired and appreciated. The remarkable thing that I would come to learn after his death is that it was really mutual. On May the 8th of this year, I went back to San Francisco and I met with Monroe Raju, the new public defender, and we hit it off pretty well. He had me lay out exactly what we were doing here in Yolo County, and his line to me was, "Why can't we do this in San Francisco?" And I gave him a list of reasons why, it wasn't going to work, and he said, "Well, let's think about how we can make this happen." And so he introduced me to a man named Jaku Wilson, who unfortunately couldn't be here this evening. But we've really hit it off. And so in June, we opened the San Francisco branch of the Court Watch. I will never forget what Jaku told me on the phone the first time. How inspired Jeff had been by our Court Watch and the partnership between the Vanguard and the Public Defender's Office in San Francisco was helping to fulfill his vision. It's a humbling moment, but a huge opportunity to expand our work. So we are here tonight to talk about the progressive prosecution movement. In order to really understand my passion for that subject, we have to go back in time to 2006. Now, in 2006, I was a graduate student at UC Davis, and I started the Vanguard that year. I started it due to what should have been a minor police incident, but it was so mishandled by the Davis Police Department and the City Council that it led to the sitting police chief resigning, the City Council voting 4-1 to disband the Human Relations Commission, and by the way, my wife was the chair of that commission. What was their crime? It was to push for civilian review of the police department. The backdrop to this case was the district attorney's race that year. The district attorney's office decided that it was a good idea to prosecute a 16-year-old girl accused of a misdemeanor hit and run in an inconsequential parking lot collision for which the family had already paid and accepted responsibility for. By the way, the defense attorney that was hired by the family was a man named Matt Gonzalez, who was our keynote speaker last year and the #2 man in the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. The district attorney's office greatly inflamed the situation by leaking tapes of this minor. The defendant was a 16-year-old girl to the local newspaper, who then covered it uncritically. And the hand-picked successor to the district attorney at that time waged a very dirty campaign and eked out a narrow victory. That case led to the Vanguard. But the Court Watch program came 4 years later, and it resulted out of another case. In 2009, I got a call from a family member of a man who had been convicted of 76 counts of raping his adopted daughter. As I have explained here numerous times, I was skeptical of their claims of his innocence. But over the years, as I looked into his case, I became absolutely convinced that Ajay Dev was sentenced to 378 years in prison for a crime that he not only did not commit, but never existed in the first place. So here we are, and it's 10 years later, and Ajay Dev still has not gotten his justice. On Monday, I will be going back to Yolo County Court because he will have the latest in a series of evidentiary hearings as his appellate attorneys attempt to undo the damage done by an aggressive prosecution. Not only did the Ajay Dev case lead me to the conclusion that we need to put people in courtrooms in order to monitor and report on what's happening, which is the foundation of our Court Watch program, but it has also led to my passion for and work on behalf of those wrongly accused and wrongly convicted. This year I've done numerous podcasts, and some of my favorites involve people that were either wrongly convicted or are currently in prison because they were wrongly convicted. One of those cases is Anand John, which we've talked about already. Another case from 2011, our first annual fundraiser, the keynote speaker was a man named Maurice Caldwell. Now, Maurice has been released from prison after serving 20 years for a murder that he did not commit. I've gotten to know Maurice over the years. And this is a man, let me tell you, he would literally give you the last shirt he had off his back if you were in need. A few weeks ago, he helped my wife out when she was stranded. He and his brother came and drove her back to Davis from Sacramento. Well, unfortunately, he's had a rough time. And he's been trying to get compensation from the state of California. But apparently the state of California doesn't want to own up to its mistakes either. And so last week, in a second tragic decision, he was denied compensation for his time in prison, reasoning that he hadn't proven his innocence. So apparently they let a guilty man out of prison who was convicted of murder. But Maurice is a fighter, and I know he's going to win this in the end. Maurice, where are you? Stand up, buddy. One of the people I greatly admire is a man named Barry Scheck. Barry Scheck, for those who don't know, had the foresight to recognize that the emerging technology of DNA testing could be used to exonerate in addition to implicate. At the core, DNA testing to exonerate has been a game changer in the criminal justice reform movement. First of all, before DNA testing could decisively prove that people are innocent, most people scoffed at the notion that we were convicting people that were innocent. They believed that we had proper amounts of safeguards. They believed that juries would see through the lies and the deceit and the mistakes. But second and most important, by looking at cases where things have gone wrong, we have learned that there are serious deficiencies in the system, and as the result, we have come to reevaluate our beliefs about the sanctity of the system, and that too has led to reform efforts. And so what we have seen over the last few years has been a movement of progressive prosecutors who have emerged because the current system is not working. We are incarcerating far too many people, putting people in prison for crimes they either did not commit or for which they were overcharged. We have created perverse incentives that in order to be elected a DA, in order to win elections, you have to get more convictions. And that has led to the seeking of convictions rather than justice. DAs should be there to wage justice, to make sure that the guilty get punished appropriately. There are plenty of guilty people in the system, but there are plenty of people that are innocent. There are plenty of people that are charged with crimes that are disproportionate to what they actually committed. A person that I have been working with on prosecutorial misconduct made the remark the other day that most prosecutors are good. I'm sorry to the prosecutors in this room, I don't agree with that. Well, I think there are prosecutors that do a good job. After watching prosecutors in the courtroom, even in progressive locations like San Francisco, I see the same problems. I was stunned, to be honest. My 4 months in San Francisco has opened my eyes in ways that I really didn't think my eyes could be opened, because I see the same problems in progressive San Francisco with a so-called progressive DA that we see in Yolo County, where we don't have a progressive DA. I know that the politically correct thing to say is that problem prosecutors, like problem police officers, are the exception, not the rule. But I've been in court for 10 years, and I don't believe that anymore. What I have seen is that on a consistent basis, we are plagued by poor investigative work, tunnel vision, and among police officers, there's rampant excessive force. And we see the same thing with prosecutors. Overcharging. Tunnel vision. Tunnel vision means you decide who committed a crime before you get the evidence that they actually committed the crime. That is the biggest problem that I see in the system. They decide you're guilty first, and then they have to prove it. There's a lack of critical analysis, and at times, all too often, shockingly often, there's outright misconduct. The common thread in these wrongful conviction cases is that in order for somebody to be wrongly convicted, the system has to have screwed up. Poor police work and the lack of rigorous examination by the prosecutor if not outright corruption, is at the root of wrongful convictions. The first case that we covered in San Francisco, we saw a man ended up acquitted on the charge of child molestation. It was a horrible case. And if it had been tried in many places other than San Francisco, we would probably be talking about another wrongful conviction. A man was accused of molesting his girlfriend's 4-year-old daughter. But there were all sorts of problems with the case. There was no physical evidence. There was no DNA. There was no real opportunity, as it turned out, for this man to have access with the child. He was never left alone with this child. And there was no corroborating evidence other than the word of a very confused 4-year-old. And to make matters worse, as you might expect when a 4-year-old tries to take the stand, she didn't do a very good job. She couldn't talk, she couldn't explain anything. And so they tried to regroup, and they met in the hallway. And a public defender investigator just happened to walk by and witness this conversation and grew very suspicious. And so he took out his iPhone, which is probably the most dangerous thing, and he started recording the conversation. And he ends up getting on the stand and testifying so that they could bring in this evidence. So, I didn't tell you what the DA told her. She said, say that. You say that. So she's coaching the witness. She's coaching an impressionable 4-year-old about exactly what to say on the stand. This comes out in open court. You think the DA got prosecuted or punished for prosecutorial misconduct? No. No, you know what happened? The investigator was threatened with prosecution for allegedly illegally recording the video. I'm not kidding. I'm not making this stuff up. That's what's wrong with the system. There are no checks. There's no balances. There's no accountability. There's no enforcement. And we have an incentive system that favors cheating to convict because the consequence for getting caught does not even exist. So the job of the Vanguard and our various court watch projects in Sacramento, San Francisco, and Yolo is to go where no one else goes, to monitor the cases that no one else is monitoring, and report what nobody else is reporting. 95% of the cases that we cover, there's no other reporter in the courtroom. Not in Yolo County, not in Sacramento County, and not in San Francisco County. 95%. That means that most of the cases that go forward, nobody in the public knows what's going on. At the same time, as we have become more aware of the problems of the criminal justice system, wrongful convictions, mass incarceration, prosecutorial misconduct, the rise of a new generation of prosecutors to combat these problems. We have seen some stunning victories over the years and some heartbreaking defeats. My friend Matt Gonzalez ran for DA in San Francisco in 1999. He was, in many ways, we were joking about this the other day, ahead of his time. It's become the in thing to do for a public defender to run for district attorney. And we've seen some amazing victories. Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, Wesley Bell in St. Louis. We've also seen some heartbreaking defeats. Dean here in Yolo County, Tiffany Caban in Queens. And we have some hope. We have hope with polls in San Francisco showing that public defender Chesa Bodine has a shot at the DA position in San Francisco despite an all-out effort by the establishment to give the advantage to his opponent. Hey, the district attorney resigned from San Francisco. He's going to move to LA, and he's going to run for DA in LA as a progressive against a more conservative DA down there. And that opened the door for Susie Loftus to be appointed by Mayor London Breed, who was supporting her. Now, how that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know. So tonight we have people from different backgrounds across the country, and they're going to be talking about progressive prosecution and how we reform the prosecution system. So our first speaker tonight is a woman that I know quite well because she used to live in Davis, but apparently we chased her away because she moved up to Nevada. And I could talk for an hour about restorative justice. And I got to keep my remark brief and let her do most of the work. But what I will say is that restorative justice is a way to get past the idea that the only answer to prosecuting people, the only answer to punishment is to incarcerate. And we live in a society where we prosecute to the hilt. And it's not clear what we've gotten as a result of that. And so we need a new way forward. And one of the new ways forward, I believe, is restorative justice. So I want to introduce my friend Lisa Ray, the president and founder of Restorative Justice International.
Thank you. This is going to be pretty short because I don't have that much time, but I want to thank David and the Davis Vanguard and the Vanguard Court Watch. And I'm going to play a video that's an introduction to RJI, Restorative Justice International. But let me say this, as it says in the profile of me. I have a legislative background, so I'm in Nevada now, as we say at Nevada, David, if I heard something a little different. And that might be just for a short time because I really was raised in California. But I worked in the legislature for 3 members and I was a lobbyist. And in 1992, I learned about restorative justice and it changed my career. It's something that is national and it's global. So I'm going to have Evan go ahead and play that video. So this is an introduction and afterwards I'll talk about wrongful convictions.
My son was 19.
That can never happen to me.
This is Steve. He can't remember anything right now.
You know, Therese and Steve were inseparable.
Salem 911, what is your emergency? Somebody's been shot. They're in the parking lot, they're laying on the ground, they've been shot.
Doug and I got married at the end of November, and Steve was killed in the middle of February.
23-year-old Leslie rear-ended Jeremy's car, causing it to explode early Saturday morning. Leslie was booked for murder, felony drunk driving, and felony evading officers.
There's been a movement growing in the criminal justice system. It has found its way into justice systems all around the world. It's not a program. It's driven by victims. Its impact is proven and undeniable. And yet, like all change, it is feared, dismissed sometimes as too soft on criminals, and sometimes too much in favor of crime victims.
For over 20 years, I've worked as a legislative advocate in the criminal justice system, working with both victims and offenders. Around the world, justice experts realize that the criminal justice system is broken and it's deeply flawed. It hurts both victims and offenders alike.
The current system is not set up to help people heal. That's kind of the bottom line. It's not set up to help victims find their voices. It's not about that.
I don't thank God that he's dead, but I thank God that I have some peace. A week from now I may, and as we learn more about who and what, I may feel differently.
The current system fails victims by leaving them out of the system. The way we process crime now is it's seen as a crime against the state, not against a victim, a real human being. Offenders aren't encouraged to take responsibility for their actions. Instead, we warehouse them in prison.
Offenders don't usually think about their victims, but that's not surprising because the criminal justice system doesn't lead them there. In fact, there are barriers that block that type of access. RJI is working to remove those barriers that block a crime victim's access to restorative justice.
I'm in the process of contacting all these different people about getting into the prison and how to do that correctly. The time that I saw Carl, I had no idea that there was anything called restorative justice. I just knew that I saw humanity in this person and I wanted to meet him.
With a criminal justice system so badly flawed that 2.2 million Americans are incarcerated in prison and jails, big questions surface. We're spending more on incarceration, but are we safer? Are crime victims satisfied? Have offenders changed once they're released?
Restorative Justice International, or RJI, calls this new vision victims-driven restorative justice. It stresses offender accountability, restoring victims and communities, but also transforming offenders, which leads to real change.
Restorative justice is not a program, but a set of principles that drives the reform of the justice system. It's a change in the system that is driven by crime victims.
It puts victims in the center of the system. Around the U.S. and globally, victims are asking for restorative justice. Evidence-based research shows it works, but victims tell us it works.
Offenders who take part in restorative justice processes are less likely to become repeat offenders. There's an emphasis on accountability, a critical component to any restorative justice process. Offenders learn what they can do to make things right from the victim's perspective.
Dayton.
I really want for you to realize how much you hurt our family. You know, your actions caused a lot of pain in our family, and I really want you to understand that.
I can understand that. Well, originally I wasn't too sure about participating in this, and then I figured it was a way to return something to your family, because I know it had to hurt a lot.
I don't know, I just feel like I have to do something. I have to do something. The things that have made me feel the best in this 9 years is what we've done, going to the schools.
Victims experience healing on some level that they don't experience through the current justice system. It's particularly critical to healing for victims after violent crime. Often, this happens through victim-offender dialogue, but sometimes it can happen through something as simple as an exchange of letters.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Turner, I don't know if I should be writing you or not. I don't want to cause you more pain. It's hard to read than I already have. I'm writing now because my mom told me she has met you, and you are good people, and you will understand if I tell you I'm sorry. I didn't know your son, but from what I heard from the video and from the videos I've seen in court, he seemed like such a good person. And it hurts inside to know his death was my fault. If I could just go back, but I can't. I have to deal with it, and I always live with the guilt. I've asked for forgiveness, but forgiveness can't make me forget what happened. What you feel is beyond what I can imagine, so I don't know what to write. Your loss was too terrible. I'm truly sorry.
For an offender to face his victim or victim's family, it's the toughest thing they'll ever do. RJI takes on tough, intractable problems that few want to touch. At RJI, and through our online discussions, we talk about how restorative justice can be applied to any kind of violent crime and any type of conflict. We're working with our affiliates as they take public positions in support of restorative justice. RJI demonstrates that restorative justice is the answer to tough-on-crime political rhetoric. It is truly comprehensive reform of the justice system. Victims are more satisfied after participating in a restorative justice process, even those impacted by violent crimes.
You know, the day that we walked out of the prison, I've never felt so empowered in my entire life. And to be able to open a door for other people to be able to go and do that is, in my mind, one of the most important things about all of this that we've done over the past several years.
It's about how to restore victims and communities, but again, how to transform offenders. This is something we're not doing, which is why our prisons are filled to capacity around the world. But we need this change. We need this new vision.
As Dr. Sandro Calvani said, at the beginning of the third millennium, restorative justice is emerging as an innovative, victims-driven healing process after a crime has injured a victim and an offender has been convicted. RJI has the great and unique value of a transparent network of scholars, justice officials, victims, and legislators who share experiences, good practices, and lessons learned in countries where restorative justice is implemented, working, and growing.
So that's my passion. And I know this kind of doesn't seem to fit maybe tonight with what we're talking about, wrongful convictions, but it does. It absolutely does, because it's on the agenda. And I got to say this, because we were talking about who's run for office and who hasn't. I ran for office. I ran for Congress, 2006, in California. And yeah, and I'm telling you, you want district attorneys that support restorative justice and Congress members and legislators and city council people. That's what you need. You got to find them. So quickly, I want to draw the connection between what you just saw with a lot of crime victims telling their stories and supporting victims-driven restorative justice, but also the fact that we know now that everyone in this room knows the criminal justice system is broken, and then the question of what do you replace it with, and it's restorative justice. So when we talk about wrongful convictions, there are a couple points I want to make. Number one, as I'll later introduce Jeff Deskovic, but number one, victims would never want the wrong person in prison for a crime he did not commit. By convicting the wrong person, the real offender is not arrested and left free to commit another crime. So that's point number one. And that's why restorative justice applies. Number two, systemic reform of our justice system must address all injustices, including wrongful convictions. Number three, DAs are the first stop for crime victims once they enter the system. And they need to support restorative justice, as we saw in the film. When that's not possible due to lack of services, they need to address it by supporting legislation and funding those services. Number 4, those who are wrongfully convicted deserve restitution. That's a principle of restorative justice. Once you're exonerated, that's what you should receive. It's a reflection of restorative justice. They are victims of the system. And number 5, prosecutors and any justice official who knowingly contributes to the conviction of an innocent person should be held accountable by the law. Absolutely. And that's what you just saw. And that's why that's a new area of restorative justice that I believe we championed in working with people like David Greenwald and Jeff. And lastly, this is just a little personal story, and I'll end with this. I've been passionate about wrongful convictions for a very long time. And I met a man through an organization called Journey of Hope, From Violence to Healing. And it's crime victims who are opposed to the death penalty. And this organization is really a tremendous group. But I met a man named Greg Wilhoit, and he was on death row in Oklahoma for a crime he never committed. And I met him going to an event in Texas. And I sat down with him, and I learned his story. And it was just awful. He never got 1 cent after he was found innocent. And he ended up in Sacramento, and he died in 2014, and he was a friend. But after that conversation, that personal contact, I thought we need to bring restorative justice to bear on wrongful convictions. So I hope you'll consider the work of RJI and look at the work we do. We are happy to be a part of this tonight, and also to work with people like Jeff and David. Thank you so much.
One thing I can say about Lisa, I think she's probably participated in more of these than anyone else. She's been involved on prosecutorial misconduct, police misconduct, now progressive prosecution. Restorative justice is something that falls into all these categories. And we actually did in 2013. We had a program specifically on restorative justice. And we had a judge from Fresno who blew us away in terms of, you think of Fresno as being kind of this, backwater location. No offense to our people from Fresno, but they're way ahead of where we are on restorative justice in terms of their youth offender program. So it's really something to behold. Introducing our next speaker. Noah Phillips is a former prosecutor, emphasis on the former part, and he served in the district attorney's office in our neighboring county, Sacramento, for 20 years. And he made the mistake of running against the incumbent district attorney, Anne Marie Schubert, right after Anne Marie captured a major crime figure. And so Anne Marie has, of course, earned the ire of progressives by failing to rein in the Sacramento Police Department and the Sacramento Sheriff's Department in a series of police shootings, the most recent being Stephon Clark, failing to prosecute police officers who tried to run over a mentally ill man a few years ago, Joseph Mann, with their car before shooting him to death in 2017, failing to prosecute police officers who brutally beat an unarmed man whose only offense was jaywalking. Can you imagine? Guy's jaywalking, cop pulls him over, and challenges him to a fight, and beats him up, and keeps his job. That makes sense, right?
Wait, was the guy a POC?
You know it. So Noah Phillips is someone who ran for the DA He supported bail reform, protecting undocumented immigrants, expanding reentry services for returning citizens, and a more aggressive approach to police accountability. Wanted to change the culture of the district attorney's office, which is probably why the district attorney's office didn't support him. And now he has formed his own law practice with Kevin Huey in Sacramento. They focus on white-collar criminal defense and other criminal justice reform. It's my great pleasure to introduce Noah Phillips.
I want to start off by thanking David and the Davis Vanguard, and for all of you allowing me into your home here in Yolo County. I'm going to be brief. I'm going to keep it short. I just want to kind of talk to you about how I think you can keep the feet to the fire of the prosecutors that continue to exist here in Yolo County, Sacramento, or wherever there is a lack of progressive thinking. So, you know, one of the things David brought up was this concept, the idea of the relationship between law enforcement and the district attorney's office. I think we can all agree that if we could change something about that relationship, it would be the coziness of it, right? So you want them to have a good relationship, but you want it to be a healthy relationship, and a healthy relationship would have some changes, right? Can anybody think of some changes they'd like to see?
You don't get points by felony convictions that ain't shit.
Yep, all right, I like it. Felony convictions, we got to work on conviction rates. We want to lower them, right?
We need to raise the bar for a felony conviction raise.
Okay, I like it, I like it. When I think about ways to change that relationship, I like to think about how much money comes into the DA races. So everyone knows that law enforcement lobbies, they like their players like Jeff Reisick, like Anne-Marie Schubert. So they put in a ton of money, right? So when the races are run, someone like the Davis Vanguard needs to shine a light on that and exploit that and explain it for what it is. Because in the races that we were involved in, hundreds of thousands of dollars were pouring into their coffers when the races got hot and got tight. If that is explained and exploited for what it is, it can get some traction. I truly believe that.
So rich liberals need to spend their money at the right time.
We did have some good liberals spending money on us, I will say that. However, I am not afraid, and I don't think anybody that ran on a progressive platform was afraid to talk about where their money came from, and I would...
That's not my point, that's not my point.
Okay.
I'm trying to say you don't decide on a political candidate on the basis of their funding sources. You decide on the basis of the outcomes.
I like that. That I like. I would think about independent investigations of officer-involved shootings. I think you want to think about that. And I think you want to, on the themes that we're talking about tonight, accountability, transparency, you want to have prosecutors that are willing to prosecute law enforcement if there is a situation that warrants it, right? So you want to be in a position where you have a prosecutor who is comfortable enough in their relationship with law enforcement to be able to stand a step away and do what they have to do when they have to do it.
Are you retrain cops?
Yeah, I think...
My bad.
No, I think retraining cops is a big deal. You know what I think? I think we need to retrain prosecutors. I'll tell you that... You know, when you look at this, one of the problems of catching up with the criminal justice reform movement is that we are continuing to train prosecutors like they were still in the tough on crime era. Statistics, convictions, trials, and that's the old way of thinking. We have to get into the new way of thinking. I think part of that is this concept of restorative justice. We had the opportunity to take part in a restorative justice program at a prison And I would suggest to any prosecutor who is running an office that to be a prosecutor, a new prosecutor in your office, they should go through a restorative justice program so they can understand the continuum of what we're talking about. I also think when we're talking about what kind of buy-in you want from your elected district attorneys, you have to think about re-entry, right? So as we move forward and we try to move away from heavy incarceration rates, from big conviction numbers, lengthy sentences, we want to spend some of that money on the back end when people re-enter society.
Otherwise they go back.
Otherwise, statistically, they absolutely go back. And so if you are a district attorney and you are committed to a progressive platform, that's got to be part of the discussion. How much money you are willing to take from your budget and spend on re-entry. I did want to talk a little bit about transparency and accountability. I know that Jeff will be talking in great detail about holding prosecutors and law enforcement accountable. I think along those veins is the following. When we all were in our races, I remember hearing about Jeff Reisick. He was sounding like he was Bernie Sanders, with the stuff that I was hearing.
When he needs to. Yeah, when he needs to.
When he needs to, exactly. And so what happens, I got the same shtick. And so what has to happen is at this point in time, someone needs to follow up with the people that won and check them on their progressive platform. And so there are ways to do that. You can have those boards, those new boards that hold law enforcement accountable. You can push those boards to hold your elected prosecutors accountable. You can request that your prosecutor be judged by progressive groups that will rate them. Exactly, that will rate them and grade them. And you can demand transparency in conviction rates, and you can ask that they set a number to reduce their conviction rates and their incarceration rates. All of that. You can do that. You can ask for it. You deserve it as people in your county. And so I encourage you from here on out until Jeff is out, keep pushing him. Keep talking to him about what he is doing. Until he's out. Until Dean makes another run. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time. Once again, thank you very much for having me here tonight. I look forward to the rest of the night.
Thank you, Noah. Another round of applause for Noah Phillips. So I briefly want to recognize a number of people around this room that have been involved both tonight and in the overall operations of the Vanguard. So first of all, I'd like all my interns here in Yolo County and my intern from San Francisco County to please stand up. And are there any past interns too? So we can't do this without the internship programs because those are the eyes and the ears of our courtroom. All right, where is Cress? Cress, stand up. Cress Bellucci is our point person in Sacramento. He's got decades of experience of working as both an activist and a journalist. Danny Silva, please stand up. Danny is the Vanguard's first full-time employee who is not named David Greenwald. So we have greatly expanded our work this year, and I couldn't have done it without Danny. And then I have some board members here. I got Nora somewhere. Where are you, Nora? And Satiki. And then I got two really exceptional people that I need to introduce. The first one is my right hand. She helped me the first time we did this event. She was barely 2 years old, and I held her the entire time. Can you imagine holding a 2-year-old baby the whole time, and she wouldn't let me go. So I was stuck there. So Jasmine, come up here. Jasmine, unbelievably, is going to be 10 this year. I don't know how that happened. Don't ask. But without her, I don't know what I would do. And then, where is Malachi and Jeremiah?
Jeremiah went to the bathroom.
Of course. So Malachi is in high school for the first time. And he went to the school dance last week with 2 girls. Now I've embarrassed him. Good job. And then last but not least, what I think a lot of people need to understand is that the Vanguard is not a 9-to-5 job. It's not a 9 to 6 job either. It's a 24/7, 360, not 65. I take 5 days off during the year. 4 days off for Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's it. But I could not do this without the full support of my wife, Cecilia. So she got me in this in the first place, but she helps me out every step of the way. So thank you. Stop. Okay, so, and also I was told to make this point. If you've signed up for the,
your family for doing this work, man, always.
They're going to come next round. So if you've signed up as a subscriber, make sure you check in with Danny so that you're signed up to possibly win one of the books. So I was told to say that. Okay, next speaker.
And if you haven't signed up,
and if you haven't signed up, why haven't you? It's $10 a month. It's the cost of a newspaper, and we are a newspaper. So there you have it. All right. So, one of the great candidates for district attorney who didn't make it was public defender. I can never say your first name right, so I gotta butcher it. Jen Jones Wright. Sorry, I'm punting on that one. She ran for the DA in San Diego on a progressive platform, and like a lot of people, was not successful. So the question will be, is she going to run again? So hopefully she can answer that question in her speech. We can break news tonight. Jen Jones Wright.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm going to come from behind this lectern podium because I was a public defender for over 13 years, and I'm a litigator, and this is a barrier for me when I'm trying to convince a jury, and so I want to make sure that I connect with you all. I am not a public defender anymore. As of 3 months ago, I left the public defender's office to become the legal director of a nonprofit called PANA, which is Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, where I help refugees and asylum seekers. When we talk about criminal justice reform, we have to address what has been happening nationally as well as locally, where immigration is being criminalized. And we cannot talk about criminal justice reform without making that recognition. So I am a native San Diegan, and I know that there is at least one other unicorn in this room. So where are you? Hello. He flew up from San Diego yesterday. I flew up from San Diego yesterday. We were not on the same flight. I'm not going to ask him if he voted for me. But I met him here, and I thought it was so awesome that he flew up for this event. That is saying something very special about the Davis Vanguard and what you all do here. And so San Diego is a completely different animal. I tell that to everyone. We've had the reputation for a very long time of being a conservative place. And I used to fight that and say, we're not that conservative. Oh, but then I ran for DA. Oh my goodness. I would like to think that Dean, Noah, and myself, as well as the other progressive DA candidates, has something to do with that number going down of unopposed DAs. I'm happy to hear that 70% of DAs run unopposed as opposed to 85%, but we're going to get that down because the key is to get progressive DAs in place. And so I'm not going to stand here long because Satana's coming up. And she is someone that we can bank on for doing the right thing where she is in her role as the DA of Durham, North Carolina. She was elected last year, and this is her first year, and I can tell you, I read her 6-month progress report, and I'm telling you right now that she is doing good things in her county. So I'm not going to stand up here long because I want to hear from her. What I will say is that I'm from Southeast San Diego, and this is a neighborhood in the what people call inner city community. I was raised by my single mother. I was told that I was never gonna go to college. I became the first person in my family to go to college. I went on to go to Howard Law School, the best, most prestigious law school in the world. And then I came back home after passing the bar, and I went to California Western School of Law and got a Master of Laws in Trial Advocacy, specializing in federal criminal defense. Right. I went to Riverside County, which is a whole different beast. They love the death penalty. The prosecutors love to just misbehave. They actually get paid to do it. And so I didn't stay there very long, and then I came back home to San Diego County, and I was there in our office of the public defender, the office of the primary public defender, for 13 years.
Talk to you a little bit about space. And thank you for allowing me into your space. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the space that we get to occupy. So what does it mean for me, right, to stand here before you, looking how I look, talking how I talk? For some of you, I may have a slight southern accent. Or as the old folks would say, being who I be. Right, as a woman, as a black woman, what spaces do I get to occupy? And what does the space that I occupy mean? And what the heck does that have to do with progressive prosecution? So I've got a little time up here with you, so bear with me while I take you on a journey. First, when we think of space, we literally think about the physical space that we occupy. The walls around us, where we live, who gets to live with us. So let's begin about talking about the physical space where I live. When I came to Duke in 1991, the only place Duke people went in downtown Durham was a gay bar and a strip club. Downtown Durham had experienced so much economic disinvestment that by the 2010 census, it was one of the poorest zip codes in America. The zip codes adjacent to downtown weren't much better. They had seen so much disinvestment that people rented houses with holes in the roof and pipes that flowed brackish water. Homeowners in those neighborhoods had so little income they couldn't qualify for home equity loans. Not that that mattered, Jen, right? Because there weren't any banks that would give them loans anyway. These neighborhoods were filled with black and brown women and their children. No matter what their income, every day the people in these neighborhoods watched police drive by several times a day, endured the sound of gunshots near their homes, were afraid for their children to play outside and go to school, watched the academic achievement of their student schools slowly erode. And even through all that, right, they still had joy. Their kids played sports, babies were born, neighbors shared time and space. Yet the space that those women in Durham occupied has now almost been all but forgotten. It's been marginalized. See, those streets meant something to the bodies that occupied them. Why else would old school Durham folk identify themselves not just by name, but by neighborhood? Sometimes even by street. The bodies that occupied those neighborhoods were filled with enthusiasm and optimism and hope. Those bodies created music and art. They created community. Yet if you lived there during this time, all you heard was about the dangerousness of those spaces and those bodies. Those were the dirty Durham days, is what we used to call them. There used to be a t-shirt that said, "I'd rather be shot in Durham than board and carry." Those were the days when if the mouth on your body said it lived in Durham, people stepped away from you. Or at best shook their heads at the dangerous space you must occupy. You were thought to not value your body. If you came here to go to college at Duke during that time, you were advised to never leave the confines of the university, especially if you were a woman. As physical space, Durham was considered ruinous. And so it was as metaphysical space too. To live in this space was to live in perceived want. The words most used to describe the psychological space of Durham during those days was gritty and urban. Outside of Durham, people could not wrap their minds around not only how you could physically live there, but why you would live in this psychological space. How could you take your genius and your promise, Noah, and use it, your holy mind, in this place, so devoid of safe space, but so psychologically damaging? The only way to save your future, right, Dean, only way to save your entire life was to leave Durham. How do you even dream in a place like that? But now, I live in one of the gleaming cities of America. Right? Downtown is a shimmering jewel of urban density. There are beautiful places to work and play. There are rooftop bars and pools, restaurants with delicious and expensive food.
Directly into the mic, they're having trouble in the back.
You're just fine. Keep preaching.
Instead of the 19 people that lived in that downtown zip code when I moved there, there are now thousands. People flock from all over the world to watch plays and films, listen to music, soak up our culture. Names that once struck fear into the heart of politicians and cop alike, neighborhoods like East Durham and Lakewood and West End, street names like Liberty, Holloway, Hyde Park, they now sparkle on the tongues of people who live there. Now when I say, oh, I went to Duke, people think I lived in this space of renovated bungalows and walkable streets, gleaming new apartments with saltwater pools, places for people who can afford an average rent of $1,200 a month. Or you live in a space now where a bank will give you a loan 700 times what they were willing to give people who lived in those same neighborhoods just 10 years ago. Physical space that includes bike lanes for people who use bikes for fun, not because they've lost their driver's licenses, right? Because they were too poor to pay a traffic ticket. Now I live in a space where we consume what other people make and we call it a festival, right? Where people can walk down the street with an open container with no fear of law enforcement. Now we live in a physical space that the world sees as cool. So it turns out that after all those years of trying to figure out how to make things happen in Durham, all the energy to change our image, all the muted cries for more investment, it turns out that Durham was only a problem when black and brown people lived there. So now, here I stand here in this space with you. I stand here before you, I'm black, I'm a woman, my gray hair, I move a little slow, it may signal to you that I'm growing old.
But I like that though.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I like having the Hallelujah choir, I'm a Southerner. Right, had I been sitting in a different space in this room, you might have imagined me to be someone else. Maybe I'm here to serve the food, but I'm wearing a suit. So maybe I work for the Vanguard, or maybe I'm an academic. It's possible that maybe I'm some not-profit executive here in your community. So who am I and why am I here? When people like me stand on stages, we often hear them speak of the places that God creates and society demands. When it is people who do the work that I do, those spaces are often created in the image of those same people. Often a stern God of their fathers with white skin and white hair. A God who demands subservience and enforces discipline and correction. A God who creates punitive spaces to punish the transgressors of his laws. But what of a space that was created by a God that looked like my mother's? The God that taught them to pray for their children and for their children's children. The God of mothers who dug into the dirt and scrubbed the floors. The ones who fled into the night. The ones who dropped to their knees when the burden of being black and female drove their shoulders into the ground. The ones who knew bondage, yet literally breathed life and freedom into the mouths of their children. What kind of justice would that God demand? Would that God send someone like me, a little black girl born so long and yet so short ago in the red sandhills of southeastern North Carolina that my birth certificate identifies me as Negro? Would that God send me to stand before you? I, born to a woman, born to a woman, born to a woman, born a slave. What would that God demand that I stand here in this space and speak to you about? So having said all that, let me introduce myself to you anew. My name is Satana DeBerry, and I'm the District Attorney of the 16th Prosecutorial District of North Carolina. Encompassing all of Durham City and Durham County. I tell you my name not because you don't know it. You are, after all, here to hear me speak. But even if you have never laid eyes on me, you still knew my name. And as they say in Durham, my name rings out. I don't tell you my name to brag. I tell you my name because every day in this country, in my community, in your community, people go nameless. People who are victims of crime, people who are accused of crime. People in our communities who have been failed by one public system after the next. People who live in communities without adequate housing, without access to health care or education. People who work for less than they are worth. People who too often look exactly like me. What does it mean for me to be the DA in that community? Right? Where so many who look like me have been driven from their homes. What does it mean for someone who looks like me in this body, in this time, in this place? So my fundamental responsibility as a district attorney is to ensure the rights of those who are victims of crimes are upheld. However, that responsibility flows from an equally important and fundamental responsibility to ensure the rights of those accused of crime are vigorously protected.
You don't overcharge.
The basis and promise of our human and constitutional rights is that justice knows neither victim nor accused, man nor woman, black nor white, citizen, nor immigrant, only right. To me, that means a place where everyone is safe and well. And by everyone, I mean victim and accused alike. Everyone is a member of our community, irrespective of the physical space they occupy. We have this social contract with each other, that we all have the right to be safe in our own bodies. Unfortunately, sometimes we violate that contract. Sometimes we steal from one another. Sometimes we hurt each other. More frequently than any of us would like, we kill each other. For those who have broken our social contract and hurt others, there must be accountability. But accountability does not mean separation from your rights. And above all, it does not mean banishment from your community, either physically or psychologically. Justice must account for a space in which we all get to remain ourselves. This justice I speak of is not one size fits all, right? There is no one size fits all approach to working with the people in our community who have been charged with crimes. My commitment has been to bring strategic and creative approaches to prosecution, approaches that always protect the rights of people and preserve fairness, approaches that remind us that in our zeal for a safer space, we want communities that are also whole and well, and approaches that remind us that one day these people will return to our community, to our space. Who do we want to come home? Who do we want that person to be? That is what equity and justice demands of us. Now, the way I've talked about my job is a radically different way of looking at what a district attorney does. During my campaign, like Dean and Jen and Noah, folks said I was making promises I could not keep, right? That I didn't understand the role, right? Did you hear that? What I do understand, that there was never going to be a minute, never going to be the case, that I came into office without knowing exactly what I was doing, without knowing what was at stake, without knowing the power that I was assuming, without fully understanding the task that lies before me. In every case, I want us to rethink how justice works in this community in which we all matter. So you're thinking, well, Madam DA, what does that mean in real life, right? What does that mean on the streets of our communities? It means that I'm committed to understand that the number one indicator of future involvement with the criminal justice system is involvement with the system when you are a child. That being prosecuted and incarcerated changes the psychological space of a child's mind. It means that I see justice as restoring children to their families and communities in ways that allow them to grow up, not locking them up. The vast majority of violent crime in any community is committed only by a small number of people. My community is no exception to that. I suspect yours isn't either. When we are busy churning the lives of people who are poor or struggling with mental health or substance abuse issues, we are not prosecuting violent crime. Shooting on the street is a physical manifestation of an unsafe space, and we have way too much of that right now. Just this year, as Duke students were moving into their dorms, a 9-year-old was murdered with a gun blocks away from them. I am committed to paying attention to the things that actually keep us unsafe, not creating ways to make more people unsafe. Justice does not depend on not just on safe physical spaces, but on safe psychological ones. This is important because we want to make sure that everyone who is charged with a crime in our communities is treated fairly, and that justice does not depend on the color of your skin or the amount of money in your pocket. Nothing makes you feel less physically safe in America than being black or brown or female or poor. In many cultures and religions, there's this concept of the relief of debt for the poor. It's called Jubilee, right? That's what it's called in the Abrahamic faith. And even tyrant kings would periodically cancel the debts to allow the poor people some measure of respite from their harsh conditions. So the way that we have taken that concept into my office is that this year I turned 50. Right? So Jubilee is also the 50th anniversary of something. In my case, it's the 50th anniversary of the birth of my parents' first child. But it's also a joyful celebration in which, not just where the debts of the poor are relieved, but in which two things are accomplished. Emancipation. As no man can forever remain a slave, the Jubilee was meant to restore equality. And two, social justice. Equality also means taking up those who are in need. Providence is for all, so the goods of the earth are the common property of all. So the way that we've done that in our community is that many of you will only ever come to court for traffic cases, right? We'll have fines or fees. But in our state, for people who cannot pay those fees, the state of North Carolina has revoked their driver's licenses. It's an unfair and inequitable practice. So I have moved the court now to grant relief in debts and fines in over 3,000 cases. That is now approaching $1 million in forgiveness. Now, the cases, many of these cases were more than 25 years old. David talked about, where's the gentleman in the hat? Where'd he go? About how long ago it was that he was incarcerated. The very first case in which we moved the court to forgive fines and fees the fees were in 1987. They give you some idea of how long ago that is. I just told you I was 50. I graduated from high school in 1987. So we know that after 2 years, poor people, if they can't pay it, they won't pay it. They're done. That's correct. And in a community like mine, the loss of your driver's license for more than 2 years completely destroys your life. Right? You can't do anything without a car. We don't have a robust public transportation system. You can't go to work. You can't look for a new job. You can't go on field trips with your kids. The city of Durham did a study and it found that 99% of the jobs that you could get in city government required you to have a driver's license. So you can't even get the kind of entry-level jobs that help you get into the middle class. However, with their debts forgiven, people have a brand new lease on life. They can go to work, they can get car insurance, and a prosecutor should care, right, about who gets car insurance. Because if you've ever been hit by an uninsured driver, right, you know how much damage that can do to you and your economic prosperity. But for people can now fully participate in the lives of our community. Now I'm going to wrap this up because I know we're kind of running behind and we still have to hear from our keynote, which I'm very excited about. But I want to tell you this. I grew up in a black church, right, which is why the Hallelujah corner over here is I like that. And so you never let people leave without telling them about their part in the creation of a brand new world.
That's right.
All right? So I have a big personality. I can be aggressive, I can be persistent, I can talk longer and louder than probably everybody in this room except Jen. Right? My name is big, but yours is too. All right? You, right now, are the most important people in your community. Right? You made it possible for people like me to stand up here in front of people like you. You're the people who understand what happens when we over-prosecute misdemeanors and low-level crime. You're the people who understand what happens when people are wrongly convicted. You are the people who understand the redemptive power of restorative justice. So So I cannot do this alone. Right? You got 3 people in the front row you can vote for here in your state. Right? And I won't be here forever. But you, this community, people like Noah and Jen and Dean, they will long outlast me. If you believe in justice, work with these people. Right? The good news is, I'm standing here before you because that's what the people of Durham did. You can do it too. Right? While many people in the courthouse and community organizations will tell you that they've been trying to change the system, with people like Noah and Jen and Dean in charge, the system responds. In less than a year, right, I've forgiven $1 million in debt, reduced the jail population by 12%, and we've done that by June. We've created a new bail policy that disfavors cash bail in every low-level case. And so what that means is that the only people left in our local jail are people who are a danger to themselves or others. And that is what the jail is for. It is not for people who can't afford to get out, people who sleep on the street, people who can't make bail. That's not what it's for. It took us 400 years to get to where we are. All right? We will not get out of it in my lifetime. The path ahead of us is long, and it will often be steep. And if folks like Jen and Noah and Dean win, they will be in uncharted waters. But you can envision a new world, but we've got to create it from this one. Right? So here's my task for you. In this political time when disagreeing or taking too long or making a misstep is often seen as grounds for walking away, keep the long view. Stay the course. Stay in constructive dialogue with each other. Stay in collaboration. We are all we got. Be in conversation with your circle about why your justice work is important and why it is time to make fundamental change to a system that has damaged each and every one of us. Think about what your role has been and what it will be as you move forward from here as a partner in justice. Stay involved. What may seem like a little for you may be life-changing for someone else. Reimagining just spaces is hard work. It's never straightforward. It always breaks down on the side of the road. We cannot let that stop us. Together, we will continue to create the community in which we all aspire, one of greater safety, greater wellness, and greater wholeness, a space that is safe for all bodies. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Satana. We started this evening on some sad notes, and we're ending this evening with hope. We have hope in Satana holding the DA's office in Durham, North Carolina, all the way across the country. And we have hope in our next and last speaker, Jeff Deskovic. So I'm briefly going to introduce him, but before I do that, tomorrow is Mr. Deskovic's birthday. Not only that, but it's a double celebration for him, because a few days ago he calls me up and he's all excited because he passed the bar exam. So in honor of Jeff, we have purchased a cake, which is in the back, and we're all going to sing happy birthday right now. And don't make me sing, but everybody else sing. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. So please go to the back and help yourself to cake. As in a second I'm going to have Lisa introduce Jeff, but I want to say a couple words myself. So I first met Jeff in New York in March, and the funniest part of my trip to New York was the shock of going from relatively balmy California to freezing cold New York, where you have to bundle up before you go outside, because if you wait till you go outside, it's too late. And you can't walk around with your jacket open because it's so cold. You got to bundle up the jacket, which in California you never have to do. And so that definitely caught my attention. We had breakfast early in the morning, and I told him what I did, and he's like, "Well, I got to come out there and speak." I'm like, and he's like, "I'll pay for it." I'm like, "Okay, good." But he says, it'll cost you something. And so the deal was we'd sing happy birthday and get him a cake. So it seemed fair to me. I've gotten to know Jeff, and it was really funny because a couple months ago I was reading this book on wrongful convictions by a professor. I think he may actually be at Duke. Professor Garrett. No, he's not at Duke. But anyway, he starts talking about Jeff, and I'm like, hey, I know that guy. But I've gotten, the thing is that I've gotten to know so many people, unfortunately, that have been wrongly convicted, and some of them are out, and unfortunately all too many of them are still in. And I'm always amazed how not bitter they are, because I think if I had lost 17 years or 41 years in the case of Marvin, I'd be bitter, and I don't know that I could survive that. And I wonder sometimes how some of the people can survive that. I read Anthony Ray Hinton's book where he's in a 5x7 cell in Alabama for 30 years. And for a good portion of that time, they wouldn't even let him have books. I mean, can you imagine? You're stuck in the cell all day, and they won't even let you get a book to read. It's a horrific system, and I'm amazed that Jeff has come out of this sane. And I'm also really respect his intellect. And his measured approach to what he does, because he's taken what could be a tragedy that would destroy a lot of people, and he's get people that are stuck in prison who don't belong in prison out of prison, and so I have a great admiration, and he's been an inspiration in what we're trying to do here in Yolo County. In some of our work looking at post-conviction cases as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Ray, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker, Jeff Deskovic.
I think he just stole my thunder there. I'll make this really short. Let me just say that I met Jeff online. And when I met him online, I thought, I got to interview this man, and so I did. But let me just do a quick introduction. So he was wrongfully convicted at 16, as you read, in New York, and spent was convicted for rape and murdering a high school classmate. He was in prison for 17 years as an innocent man from the age 17 to 32, and he was released in 2006 due to DNA. He's the founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation, based in New York, which works to free the innocent, and he earned a bachelor's and a master's while in prison. And yeah, wow. And then, as you heard, he earned a law degree from Elizabeth Hobb School of Law at Pace, and then just this week passed the bar. So it's unbelievable. I mean, so as I said, I became aware of his story online. We talked briefly on the phone, and like I said, I thought, holy cow, I was so impressed. And I did a podcast, which is on our website, Restorative Justice International. And because of the work that we started to do, we invited Jeff to be on our Global Advisory Council at RJI, which he agreed to. And he is now a national and international advocate for those who are wrongfully convicted. And in 2008, RJI worked with Jeff and other advocates in supporting New York legislation, creating a prosecutorial conduct commission. And you've heard about that. That bill was signed last year by Governor Cuomo. And we praise him for his work, and also Bill Bastick, who's here tonight. But Jeff is a friend and a colleague, and as we work together to reform the criminal justice system, it includes ending wrongful convictions. You will never find a man more passionate and hardworking as an advocate for the innocent men and women in prison than Jeffrey Deskovic. I give you Jeff.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Not really sure that I'm, you can put the first slide up. I'm not really sure that I'm like here tonight, here, you know, in Davis, California, because it's, my life has had a journey that I could have never anticipated. From being arrested and ultimately wrongfully convicted, to being exonerated, to becoming an advocate, to graduating law school, to doing advocacy work, to speaking in other countries and speaking across this country. I could never have anticipated any of this. So it's kind of surreal, and that's what I mean by that. So I was wrongfully convicted in 1990. I had been arrested when I was 16. I got bailed out. I turned 17 by the time the trial rolled around. And I was wrongfully convicted based upon a coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender. Wow. Let me unpack that a little bit for you. Before I was a teenager, I wanted my career, what I wanted to have when I became an adult, was I wanted to be a cop. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would talk to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. Okay. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. I came from a single-parent household. My father was never involved in my life. I never actually met him until 6 months after I had been exonerated. And that directly intersected with the good cop, bad cop tactic, otherwise known as Mutt and Jeff, in which one officer takes on a more aggressive role, whereas his partner pretends to be opposed to what's going on, but somehow powerless to interfere. So eventually they got me to agree to take this polygraph test, otherwise called a lie detector test. Some new information had come into the police file, so they said, and they wanted to share that with me, and that would allow me to be even more effective in assisting them. So the next day, rather than report to the high school, I instead went to the police station where I had heard through the rumor mill that the other people had been polygraphed at. Since it was a school day, that meant neither my mother nor my grandmother with whom I lived thought anything was wrong, so they didn't call around looking for me. They drove me across county lines. I'm from Peekskill in Westchester County, and the Peekskill police, they drove me from Peekskill 40 minutes away by car to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County, which meant that I didn't know where I was. I wasn't able to leave anymore. I was totally dependent upon the police. There were 3 officers there who had came with me from Peekskill, but then there was also the Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, the polygraphist. But he was dressed as a civilian. He never read me my rights. I never learned until much later after I'd been arrested that he actually was a police officer. He gave me a 4-page brochure which detailed how the polygraph worked, and it had a lot of big words in it which I didn't comprehend, but then again, so I thought I was there to help the police. What did it matter? Let's just get on with it. So from there they put me into a small room and they gave me countless cups of coffee, which seems fairly clear that the purpose of that was to get me nervous. It was to wire me up.
Right.
The premise of the polygraph is that when a person tells a lie that you'll become nervous and your nervousness will result in an increased pulse rate, and it's actually the pulse rate which is measured by the machine. But other factors which would lead to an increased pulse rate could also involve caffeine and certainly fear. So the coffee was part of the setup. So from there he attaches me to this polygraph machine, and now I was immobile. I could stand up, but that's it. I couldn't take a step. The machine was very heavy, and there wasn't very much slack in the wires. So then he launched into his 3rd-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. I was 16 years old, and he was a mountain of a man, a fully formed adult, and I wasn't used to talking to adult males, and so the manner in which he was conducting himself made it extremely frightening for me. Each hour that passed, my fear increased in proportion to the time. He kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Eventually he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told us through the test result that you did. And we just want you to verbally confirm it." So when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. At that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off previously but couldn't do so any longer. You have to help yourself here, you understand. Well, considering that I maintained my innocence for the previous 6.5 to 7 hours, it was clear what he meant by that. They wanted me to confess. When he added that if I did as they wanted, they'd stop what they're doing, that I was not going to be arrested, being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term. I was only concerned with my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically, and there was the push-pull dynamic in play, because on one hand the possibility of harm had been thrown in the air, and on the other hand the false promise that I wasn't going to be arrested. By the time everything was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor into a fetal position. I was crying uncontrollably. Needless to say, I was in fact arrested. That interrogation, by the way, was not videotaped. There was no audio tape. There was no signed confession. There was simply the cop's word for it. And as a result of that, they were able to leave the threat and false promise out of their testimony. Before I went to trial, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab showing that semen found in the victim didn't match me. The DNA excluded me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, instead they continued to prosecute full speed ahead. This is where the prosecutorial misconduct comes in. When there's an autopsy done, there's audio and written notes which are taken contemporaneously as findings are made by the medical examiner. So it was only after this DNA didn't match me that suddenly this medical examiner claimed that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence. This is 6 months later, hundreds of autopsies later, he remembers that he forgot to document medical findings which he claimed proved that this victim, a 15-year-old immigrant from Colombia who had been in the country for about a year and a half, leading a pretty sheltered life. As I understand it, she never went anywhere unless she was accompanied by her older sister or her parents. He claimed this medical evidence proved that she was sleeping around with just about everybody in the city. That's what allowed the prosecutor to argue that it didn't matter that the DNA didn't come from me. That didn't mean I was innocent. There was yet another person that she slept with prior to my raping and murdering her. Taking it a step further, he actually named another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim.
That's mine.
But he never bothered to first set a proper evidentiary foundation. He never had that other individual DNA tested. He never even called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument from the jury. My public defender essentially didn't defend me. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. When it was time to cross-examine the medical examiner, my lawyer stood up in open court and with a big smile on his face, like him and the ME were great friends from back in the day, said to him, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you."
No, he did not say that.
My lawyer never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that proved that this confession obtained under highly questionable circumstances was coerced and false. I wanted to testify at the pre-trial hearing about the threat and the false promise because I was the only person other than the cops that could have added those facts to the record. But he wouldn't allow me to testify at the pre-trial hearing. He said he hadn't decided if I was going to testify at the trial or not, and he didn't want to have me testify previously than that potential appearance at trial, which didn't really make any sense because, first of all, if the judge had believed me, the statements would have been ruled involuntary and they would not have been admissible, and lacking any other evidence, there would not have been a trial. But secondly, if it really did go badly, I didn't have to take the stand at the trial, and if I didn't, there would be no way the prior testimony could be used.
Right.
But then when I got to the trial, he wouldn't allow me to testify there either. He informed me that it wasn't his job to prove that I was innocent. It was up to the prosecution to prove that I was guilty, and he didn't think that it happened. That might be a legal principle, but that's a very naive way to practice law. In reality, if your client is charged with a crime that they didn't commit, you have to try to prove that they didn't do it, or your client runs a risk of being wrongfully convicted, particularly in a confession case where there's an 80% conviction rate. I mean, most people don't believe that an innocent person would confess. So if you're confronting a case against a client for a client in which there's a confession, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain why it was given. When I hadn't decided if I was going to go with a jury trial or a bench trial, one day my lawyer came to me and told me that the judge told him off the record to pick a jury because he didn't want to be responsible for finding me not guilty. That was improper for the judge to limit my decision that way because we were thinking about going with a bench trial, but by him making that comment, it made it impossible. My lawyer was supposed to put that on the record and ask the judge to recuse himself because a statement like that shows bias and it suggests that perhaps he's feeling public pressure because just about every time I made a court appearance, it was a major media moment with virtually all of the coverage from a guilt presumptive-oriented perspective. Added all up, I was wrongfully convicted. When this happened, I was not the adult that you're looking at here tonight. And so, to bring that to life, I'm going to go with the first slide now. This is a picture of my mugshot. The next slide will show me in the courtroom after it was announced that the jury had reached a verdict, but prior to it being read. The next slide will show what I looked like at the sentencing hearing. The next slide will show what I looked like shortly after arriving in Elmira Correctional Facility, which was a men's maximum security prison, because that's where they send you if you're charged as an adult. This is in New York. I want to share with you how it was that I came to be exonerated. I went to the appellate division. My issues were my innocence, wrapped around the arguments that there was legally insufficient evidence, that the prosecution hadn't proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the verdict was against the weight of the evidence. My lawyer argued that my Fifth Amendment rights had been violated, even without the threat and false promise on the record. And they raised six issues of law. The appellate division wrote that I was not in fact in custody, that I was free to come and go as I wanted. That influenced their decision in deciding that the statements were voluntary. They rejected all of my innocence arguments by writing that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which is kind of a head scratcher even to this day, considering that the DNA didn't match me. And then they got rid of my other issues of law in one sentence by writing that they had looked at my issues and found them either to be without merit or else not preserved for review. They ruled against me 5-0. That was the most that the court ever wrote. My re-argument motion was denied in one word. New York State's highest court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because my attorney had been given the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure, and so my petition arrived 4 days too late, which the then district attorney took the opportunity to successfully get the court to simply rule that I was late without ever looking at my issues. I challenged that ruling in front of 3 more courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, but I was turned down each time. I wrote letters for 4 years, rarely getting answers. The goal, of course, was to try to find pro bono representation because I couldn't afford to hire a lawyer. The goal was to get the representation, but also get an investigator, because once your appeals are exhausted, the only way back into court is either if the court makes a retroactive decision in the law and applies it backwards, which almost never happens, or if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence. I wasn't going to find any unknown evidence of innocence myself personally while I was locked up in prison, so hence writing letters, trying to find representation. I did that for 4 years. I rarely got answers other than the occasional no. I went to the parole board, where I stood on my innocence rather than express remorse and take responsibility. And in large part based upon that, I was denied parole. I wound up, that was at the end of my 15-year sentence minimum term. I wound up doing an additional year before I was exonerated through further DNA testing. The DNA data bank had been created, and getting the Innocence Project representation was the first of 3 key factors. Another one was that the district attorney who had took office, Janine Pirro, she left office. She had fought all of my appeals and blocked me from getting further testing several times. So she left office, and her successor was not as dug in as to my case, and she allowed me to get further testing. As I understand it, she didn't like her predecessor, and her predecessor was in the middle of running for Attorney General, so that's part of the backstory of why she allowed the testing, hoping that I would be exonerated to ruin the Attorney General run. I'll take it how I can get it. And the third thing was we got lucky, and this is where wrongful conviction as a public safety issue really crystallizes. And this is a big part of the intersection why crime victims have a stake in wrongful conviction, is because the actual criminal left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed the second victim 3.5 years later, who had a couple of children and who was a school teacher. He later admitted that he was the person who committed the crime, not just to law enforcement, but also to a reporter on video camera. So on September 20th, 2006, my conviction was overturned and I was released, and I reported back to court on November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. I've found some purpose in what happened to me. I consider that my role in the world is to fight wrongful conviction, and that's how I make sense of things in a kaleidoscopic type of way. I find it healing, and I find it cathartic. I did open a nonprofit organization, which was referenced before in the intro, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, and we have been able to free 7 other wrongfully convicted people in 6 years. I want to look at a couple of more slides I'm going to share with you. So Evan, please, the next slide is another picture of me while I was in prison. The next slide, this is when I was released. Or the next one, this is a picture of me and my mother. That was our first hug in the free world in 16 years. Then the next slide will illustrate, this is when I started the foundation. Wrongful conviction can and does happen to anyone. To my right in the red tie is Fernando Bermudez, who's listed in the National Registry of Exoneration. He was exonerated after 18 years in Manhattan. And then to my left is Jabbar Collins, who did 16 years before he was exonerated in Brooklyn. And to his left, you might recognize Raymond Santana of Central Park 5 fame, who was exonerated along with his other 4 co-defendants. Next slide. This is the first person we exonerated. This is William Lopez, who did 23 and a half years in a murder case which he didn't commit. We came into his case in the last year. We did some investigative work in collaboration with his pre-existing legal team, and he was released. He was exonerated. His entire adult life was stolen from him because he passed away after being home for 1.5 years. The next slide, to my left, that's in the red tie, that's William Hawhey, who did 8 years and 4 months in an arson case that actually was an electrical fire. In that case, we did the entire case by ourselves in-house, and the end result of it all was that the Putnam County District Attorney's Office stipulated that our client was innocent. They stipulated to everything that we had found, so he was exonerated. So changing gears, I want to talk about the theme of tonight of progressive prosecutors. The results that can be obtained when a prosecutor is elected who's running on a progressive plank can be breathtaking. In Dallas, the first district attorney who had the conviction review unit, Craig Watkins, more than 40 people were exonerated through his conviction review unit. In Brooklyn, Ken Thompson exonerated 23 people in 2.5 years. And as was mentioned earlier, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia has exonerated 10 people in 20 months. So there's a number of benefits, to having progressive prosecutors. In the first place, just the fact of somebody running as a progressive prosecutor can significantly further the issue. Not so much that you're going to push your opponent into suddenly being progressive. They're going to imitate some of the rhetoric, but they're not going to implement. But it's more on the level that you're going to raise public consciousness about the problem about the problems of the justice system. They can raise the issue of wrongful conviction. Ken Thompson ran on a wrongful conviction plank. You can inject other issues into the district attorney's race, such as prosecuting police who engage in police brutality, such as prosecuting police who engage in deadly, unjustifiable, deadly police force, such as diversion programs, drug usage as a public health problem, and diverting nonviolent offenders from incarceration to rehabs and other programs that are more oriented to rebuilding their life and returning, to being restored and trying to lead a crime-free life. But then once you get in office, if they get in office, so you can have a real conviction review unit whose employee names are known, that has a budget, that don't do things on the side as needed, but instead their work day in and day out is to correct wrongful convictions. You could implement a step-back approach in which, as an individual prosecutor, you pretend like you're a jury, that you're a judge, and you scrutinize the case that the police brought to you, and you look for troubled signs that a confession may be false, or that an informant might be lying, or that an identification is false. You look for those patterns that have appeared in cases that have previously ended in DNA exoneration. You scrutinize the case rather than blindly prosecuting everything. You can implement discovery in which both sides have access to the same information, so a trial really is a search for the truth rather than trial by ambush. You can set the culture in the office, in which being a minister of justice, which means dismissing against innocent people, which means convicting the guilty with lawfully obtained evidence without violating rights. Without overcharging, without seeking over-sentencing. You can establish that if it's discovered that there's a clear-cut intentional case of misconduct, that employee is going to be fired immediately. You could end overcharging and the other issues which I mentioned. You can implement, now that you ran on those. You can divert people from incarceration. You can encourage restorative. Justice. You could get involved in innovative programs like prisoner reentry. That's crime prevention. That has something to do with the office, to be sure. You could send letters to the parole board. In the case of people who've been model prisoners whose rehabilitation is clear, they can make an appearance at the parole board with a letter on the DA letterhead recommending that they be released after noting what their disciplinary record and educational record is. But then those are things that are directly within your control as a district attorney. But then your voice counts a lot on legislative issues that are not within your control, but that are instead matters reserved to the legislature. So you can speak up about criminal justice reform issues. You can speak about mass incarceration, right, when bills are considered for that. You can speak about aging people in prison. You can raise your voice up when it comes to parole reform. You can speak up about college education for prisoners, which is a major crime-fighting tool, by the way, in the sense that the recidivism rate's extremely low for those who've received a college education in prison rather than those that have not. You can speak up about wrongful conviction prevention measures, such as videotaping interrogations, such as better identification practices. You can speak up that there should be an even budget between the public defender's office and the district attorney's office. You can speak up with some of the institutional disadvantages that hamper even the most determined public defenders, such as having way too large a caseload, such as the inequities in which the district attorney has access to a lot of investigators and experts, and the defense is relegated to asking the judge to allocate funding, which a lot of times is denied because the judges want to keep the costs of the trial down on the county. So you can speak up about those things. You could speak up about a broken compensation system, such as, for example, since we're here in California, a system that in order for that you have to have either the prosecutor stipulate that the defendant who is exonerated is in fact innocent, or a judge to say that. Even if the conviction wasn't reversed on innocence grounds, you need the judge to say that. Otherwise, this is how this crazy system is out. And even then, it'll be up to the governor if he's going to sign the bill or he's not. And even if you somehow run that whole gauntlet successful, you know what you're going to get? You will get $140 a day. That breaks out to about $50,000 a year. That's an insult of an amount of money for a year of wrongful incarceration. So as a district attorney, you could speak up about that kind of practice. Lots of benefits for progressive prosecutors to the community. But on the other hand, the opposite is true. Prosecutorial misconduct is a major cause of wrongful conviction. To relate it back to California, so there's been 707 court-identified instances of prosecutorial misconduct. 46 of the prosecutors in those cases were repeat offenders on the misconduct, and only 6 people out here in California, of that, all those numbers are California numbers, only 6 people actually were disciplined. One of the big examples in prosecutorial misconduct, it's a case that was spoken about before, but I want to just quickly go through it, just to highlight it, because in a lot of ways it's a reason why we need to address and do something about prosecutorial misconduct. I'm talking about the Ann and John Alexander case. And let me have the next slide, by the way. Okay, here we go. Okay. This photo is an illustration, by the way, that fighting wrongful conviction is not something that you're fighting against law enforcement. This is public safety, and it's about justice and accuracy. And this photo here shows that there is buy-in from some law enforcement. Next photo is another class. They brought me in to do the ethics and best practices portion of the training for the cadets as they neared graduation. The next photo. The next photo. And one more. So, I mentioned the Ann and John Alexander case. So he was charged with, 3 counts of rape. He was a high-profile fashion designer. He was charged with 3 counts in Texas, in Dallas. All of those were dismissed when he requested to go to trial. He was charged with a count in Houston that was also dismissed. Then in New York, he was charged with 49 counts. 39 of them were dismissed before trial. 39 were dismissed before trial. Then that left another 10. So the court made this agreement with him, and this is kind of like a really big illustration of prosecutorial misconduct. So the deal was, if he agreed to plead guilty to one charge, they would dismiss the other 9 and give him the crucial exculpatory information which he needed in order to file his habeas petition here in California. Does anyone think there's something wrong with having to plead guilty in order to get exculpatory material that you need to file a habeas attorney, or am I the only one? But thinking on his feet, he decided to plead guilty to a count that had already been dismissed, with the idea if he ever managed to come up under everything, he could come back and knock that one out. And so he pled guilty to 1 count of forced oral copulation on a female, an adult. So if you can think that's kind of nuts. In California, he was charged with 59 counts, and so he was convicted of 35 of those were dismissed. He was convicted of 15, and the jury deadlocked on some of them, and some of them he was acquitted. So in terms of the validity of this case and whether or not he was wrongfully convicted, a couple things kind of jump out at me. So first of all, witnesses who were not believed in one jurisdiction were believed out here in California. So that's the first sign that something's not quite correct. But another thing is that photographs taken from MySpace accounts, which is attorneys and legal team, of which one of them is here tonight, of these victims kissing him. Who does that? Who kisses your rapist like a year after this rape happens? It's crazy. But then there was the prosecutorial misconduct involved, in that it was claimed that the victims had no financial motivation, except that they in fact were planning lawsuits, and it was claimed falsely that they didn't know each other, and that the sheer number of victims was a reason for believing the charges, because who's going to come up with that type of big conspiracy? But in fact they did know each other, and they were all, one person was recruiting the other. But they were told not to bring race and religion into the trial, except that the prosecution did. They did not share exculpatory material, including including a criminal record from some of the witnesses, including one person who had been charged with previously falsely accusing somebody in a sex offense case. So that's the case that we're talking about. So in a lot of ways, Annan's case is an example of prosecutorial misconduct. And we can share the next slide here. And one more slide. So currently there is an effort to exonerate him in court, but at the same time, because the wheels of justice often turn slow, and the results of efforts to exonerate are anything but certain, a second front is opened in which Annan is seeking commutation. So I do call on Governor Newsom to grant the time commutation so he could be released from prison. He's not even planning to stay in the state. He'd like to go back to India so where he could be with his family. So he's done quite a bit of time, and I don't see why that couldn't be done. In terms of remedies for prosecutorial misconduct, so I'm an advisory board member of the coalition group It Can Happen to You, and we went from idea to signed legislation in 8 years. A landmark bill was passed in New York, creating the country's first commission on prosecutorial conduct. The current grievance system, oversight system, is totally ineffective. I gave you the stats earlier. Lawyers often don't file complaints because they know that nothing is going to happen, and because they know they're going to suffer retaliation and their future clients will suffer retaliation. Plea bargains that would otherwise be extended would not be. The commission, in contrast to that, the commission complaints could be anonymous, or the commission could proactively look at cases on its own. It would have subpoena power. They would have the expertise in dealing with prosecutorial misconduct. The present grievance system, that's more oriented for defense lawyers and civil lawyers who do things like commingling funds. It's not there really for prosecutorial misconduct. It would dovetail with the legislation that was passed here in California, making it an E felony when exculpatory material was withheld. But so far, who's being prosecuted when that happens? And it's been largely because the offenders aren't identified. So the commission, upon reviewing complaints and substantiating it, it would then be public. And so those offenders, those criminals who parade as court officers and upholders of the law as prosecutors, so that they could then be prosecuted. So that's the purpose of the commission. And we've begun working here in California to build a statewide coalition to bring our blueprint of success from New York here in California. So, we're going to be, working with many of the people here in the room, and we're going to build a statewide coalition. We're going to be in California on a semi-regular basis, and certainly we need everybody here in the room and throughout the state, to work with us in coalition. Maybe the last thing I'll point out is that, and this is another reason why the commission is important, because it's not just reviewing things after the fact, but it's also deterrence prevention. When somebody is falsely accused, even if the charges are dismissed, even if they're acquitted, their world has been turned upside down. Were you really innocent? Did you somehow get off? What about the mental strain? What about the reputation? What about families not knowing if their loved one is going to be going away for crimes they didn't commit? Jobs are lost, businesses can be destroyed, financial problems can set in. I want to mention a couple people with us, and I'm going to end on this, that had a false murder charge and assault charge dismissed against them recently, and they drove 14 hours from the state of Washington to come to Sacramento to meet us in person, to come to this event. I would like to asked to stand for a second. James Fair and his wife Angela Fair, they were both falsely accused and charges were dismissed recently. So with all of that, I want to thank everybody. I know it's been a long night. Thank you so much for your attention, and hey, thank you for celebrating my birthday with me.
Speaking of which, Jeff, go take a look at your cake, then they're going to cut it, and everybody please get a piece of cake so we're not left with 50,000 pieces. Also, everybody who is signed up as a subscriber can go to the back table there and get your book.
Where do we go if I want to subscribe?
To the back table. She'll sign you up.